you all hear me? Brilliant. Alright guys, before we start to look into this topic, I'd like to ask you to do me a favor. And actually, Lishba and Marco and a few others, they are organizing the Student Conference Committee, Liaison Committee. I think this scheme is very important also for us as teachers to better understand what you really need and which aspects really fall short no matter in and beyond classes. And for this purpose, we do need 1 or 2 student reps for our course, and not only for the committee but also just to communicate with each other. And if what you really need, or if you have any comments on the classes or reading materials, anything else, and the reps, if you think it is more comfortable for you to talk to the reps instead of directly to me. This may be very important, the role of the rep. And so, can I just ask who would like to help me and to work as the rep and then work together with Marco and Alishba, the committee? Okay, Sherry, yeah. Thank you very much. And we've got one. So, anyone else? Okay, please let me know if you are still interested in and would like to work together with Sherry. Thank you so much, Sherry. Not everyone is here, but another issue that I want to ask you, perhaps you have noticed that we got a formative assessment, and the schedule is cited in the course guide, which actually the question should be released by this week. I have created the question, but I want to ask you, because as you can see that it's quite early for you to do the formative assessment. The issue was, I just followed what I did for my postgraduate course, but they actually will do a long essay as the summative assessment, and they will start to prepare the essay perhaps around the reading week. However, for you guys, you will do an exam in May, so it's actually very late. I'm not quite sure whether this is the best point of time for you to do the formative assessment. I don't really want you to practice by writing an essay. So it will be kind of like an open question, just like exam questions as well. But I think in order for you just for you to make the best use of the formative assessment, you may treat it as like an exam question. If you conspire like 1 hour or 2 hours, and then you can concentrate on that question. You just quickly, well, of course you can prepare in advance because our exam will be open book. So you look for different materials and articles, then you find 2 hours, just focus on that question. And as you know, you've done a lot of exams. Exams are different from essays. You don't really need to make very rigid, you don't need to rigidly follow the citation rules and so on. So I hope that you may just use the practice to prepare for the exams. Then I thought about the timing issue. Is it too early? Do you think it's too early for you to do the practice before the end of February? Or perhaps you would say, I may prefer to do it, for example, by the end of week 10. In that case, I will try to get back to you with my feedback in 2 weeks. Then there is a shorter gap between the practice and the exam. Okay.
So, sorry, I was just thinking the only issue that might be to have the formative right at the end of the semester, as opposed to reading week, is for in 4th year, when we have our dissertation, it's due in just after week 10, or it is on week 10. So I'm thinking if we have a formative around that period as well, to be honest, I don't think I would have the time to do it. I think because my dissertation is so important, I think I wouldn't do the formative.
Exactly, that's a big issue for 4th year students. So when is the deadline for the dissertation?
21st of March.
Oh yes, 21st. That's week 9, isn't it?
So
Oh God.
10.
I thought it was week 10.
I don't remember.
That probably week. No.
So it's like the last week of class.
If it's 21st, I believe we still have another class after that. So it's probably week 9.
Right.
So it's week 9. Then it means that either way will work for me, but just for you. If you prefer to do it during the reading week, you don't have classes, that I can send the question to the course assistant today, and then you do it by the reading week, and then I'll give you the feedback by the end of the class, of the course. Or if you think you will submit the dissertation by week 9 and you prefer to do it weekly, that's too intensive, isn't it? So, just not everyone is here. For third year students, I think it's not a big issue. Okay.
I had a question. So
Okay.
by reading week, we would have covered like the first half of the content. Is that correct? And the exam will be structured as one question in the first half of the content and one question in the second
The
half.
format of question will just be based on I've let you know the first 3 weeks classes. So yeah, that's not a problem. It will be a question that you have studied, you have learned. Of course, for the summative exam, they will cover all the seminars. So let's still stick to the existing schedule. So I will send a question to the office by today, and hopefully it will get released by this week. Okay, thank you guys. So let's start our discussions today. So what we're going to look at today. So we will start by looking at the fundamental theories. Despite that we are a law course, but what we will focus on is what we said last week, the efficient capital market hypothesis. And this is actually the ground for modern capital markets regulations, which are disclosure-based. So having a brief look at the propositions of this hypothesis and its limits, as well as the implications for disclosures. After that, then, because we have Alois and Ben who have a business background, so I would hope that you can help me explain the efficient capital markets hypothesis and the limits to our law students. And feel free to ask me, including me, ask us questions. Then I will hand over the stage to you guys, and we're going to look at mandatory disclosures and voluntary disclosures. So if you look at the reality, it's a mix of mandatory and voluntary disclosures to better understand the strengths or the limits of both. So I hope that first of all you guys discuss in groups, and then let's debate whether we shall only, let's do this on I'm going to divide you guys into 2 different groups, and then one will argue for mandatory disclosures, the other side will argue for voluntary disclosures. So let's do this. And then that's probably the first part. In the second part, I think I'm not going to go through the details of what I included in secondary market disclosures. They're quite technical or procedural. So I will just briefly talk about some slight differences between the primary purposes of prospectus disclosures in prospectuses and secondary market disclosures. Then our focus is actually the legal aspect in relation to misstatements. So companies or their directors, their civil liabilities for any misstatements in prospectuses, as well as ongoing disclosures, secondary market disclosures. And then we are going to look at the legal issue in the second half. Okay, so, alright, so let's start with the efficient capital market hypothesis. Let me ask our law students, have you ever heard about it, or have you done some readings before today's class? You have a basic idea what it is? Alright, Luis? Yeah.
Well, so I think this is the way I have made sense of the hypothesis in my head, is that when you're looking for a efficient market, it's kind of what it says on the tin. It's looking to make sure that goods or capital are distributed in the most efficient manner possible. And by efficient means that there's the minimum amount of monetary wastage. So it's sort of like the price of the goods accurately reflect what they should be valued at. So how much people are willing to pay for them. and a lot of that, and that kind of goes back to basics of supply and demand. And the main factors that would influence the price would be information about the product. So essentially, well, there's the different ways of thinking about it, but in the strongest version of it, it's all the information about it, all the information about the product that's available, the more accurately the price will reflect the value of the product, and so the less wastage there is and the more efficient the market is.
Brilliant. Yeah, that is the idea of the efficient capital market hypothesis. It actually just means all information in the strong form, all information relevant to the company, its performance, its business operation, can be quickly factored into the share price because the market can react to all information very swiftly, and then as you saw it, because people can react very quickly, then they treat no matter selling or purchasing, and that will change the landscape of demand and supply. All those processes can proceed very fast, and then we can see that the new share price is formed very quickly. So this is the basic idea. So can I also ask Lloyd and Ben, do you want to add anything to the basic idea in relatively plain language, please, about the efficient capital market hypothesis and the three forms, what the implications for, especially for like disclosures or we say market abuse regulation, insider dealing, then as you probably know better than I do, so what are the limits of this hypothesis when we try to use it to understand the real capital markets? Who would like to go first?
Well, the definition of the capital markets hypothesis is quite, I think you've got it quite clear and sort of like brief on the thing, so I don't really think you'd need to go in more deep than that. But the limit is really, it's based on the theory that every investor is rational and looking for a profit, whereas that's not true, because some people have investments that they have emotional attachment to and don't want to give up. So even if the information saying, oh, this product's not worth this, people may still buy it just out of either ignorance or emotional attachment. And then that leads into like the whole behavioural finance and sort of like herding theory. It doesn't pan into real life because investors aren't rational. And I think that's probably the easiest way to say that it's limited because it's based that people are rational and will do self-serving things, but not every investor does.
Brilliant. So I think in modern financial theories, I think the most significant or powerful update theory, which is updated to efficient capital market hypothesis, is probably behavioral finance, that people are very often affected by their emotions, irrational factors, their perceptions of like risks or like their preferences, or by sense and experience and culture and tradition and so on. And as there are quite a lot of empirical studies showing that very often the market may not react immediately or quickly, or they actually underreact to like the officially made financial statements. Whereas on the other hand, we may also observe that the market tend to overreact and they are too sensitive to information which is not verified or which is not, or the source of which is actually not known by the market as a whole. And well, coding is of course a very typical example. People just follow what other investors do without doing their own research or considering their own financial context and so on. So that's a big limit. And in addition, just opposed to efficient capital market hypothesis, some other scholars propose the noise market hypothesis. So of course, physically, noise is also information, but in terms of like investment information is only those which were only that is material for making an investment decision virus. And others which may not be relevant, which may be, for example, misleading. That's the focus from the legal perspective, which is misleading. then could be regarded as noise, whereas investors may treat on noise, they may not behave rationally. Okay, so there's some like debates, but these debates are actually in the subject of finance, not in law. And then, right, so let's try to go back a little bit to the different forms. So, what are the three forms about, Edward? Could you please to delve into more details for us?
Well, you have the weak form efficient market hypothesis, which is the idea that I think price reflects information to some extent, but not significantly. Then semi-strong form, which is like most information is included in the price, and then strong form is all information is included in the price. Is that correct?
Pretty much. Let me just try to explain in more details. So in weak form, it means that the current price reflects all historical information. So when the current price, the market price of the company's stocks has changed again and again following the release of new pieces of new information, then the current price can show all those pieces of information reflecting the historical performance of this company. So or we could also see that the current price is based on all the previous changes in price. Then that is the weak form. And then let's see now, for the time being, the current price reflects all historical information, and now there is a piece of new information. But if this new information can only be factored into the market price slowly, which means the market will need a relatively longer time to react, people perhaps, for whatever reasons, they can't make swift changes in their tradings or in the investment decisions. Let's say the market need 1 week to fully reflect the new information. Then some investors who are sophisticated, who have expertise, they may foresee the direction as well as the extent of the future price change. Those investors during the week can treat the stocks in advance to profit. Then in the weak form of efficiency, the current price can reflect the historical information, but it may adjust to a piece of new information relatively slow. Then during this window, some investors may profit if they can foresee the change of price, no matter the direction on the scale. Am I making any sense about the weak form? But let's assume that still at this moment, there is a piece of new information which is released. The market investors can react very quickly. So they only need 10 minutes, for example, to reflect the new information. Then for most of us, we don't really have an alternative to profit. Because when we can react, but when most of us can react, the price already changed. So this we call the semi-strong form of information. But why we call the semi-strong form of information efficiency? Why? Because what I'm saying is the new information is released, is made available to the public. Or let's say there is inside information, the information stays private, not released to the market as a whole. In this context, only insiders, those who have access, we'll talk about the definitions next week, only insiders have access to this information, then they can trade in advance, no matter the purchase or sell, depending on whether the information is positive or negative, to make a profit or to avoid a loss. The majority of the investors who do not have access to inside information cannot do so. And then when this market can react to publicly available information very quickly, but cannot accommodate inside information quickly, this is the semi-strong form. Then when it comes to the strong form, even if there is inside information, because investors they react so efficiently, and insiders they trade so quickly, and a lot of investors, even if they don't know what the inside information is exactly about, they may tell the general trend by observing insiders' trading behaviors, and then they will also react. That insider information will also be quickly factored into share price, or we could see no matter insider or publicly available information, all information is just factored into the price quickly. That is a strong form. Then let's think all together. So you more or less know what our capital markets look like. Do you think, well, it's an efficient marketing theory, or which form of efficiency is our capital market, like the UK capital market, usually exhibits? Louise?
So I suppose our market would be semi-strong because, well, there's a lot of information that will that gets disclosed. So, for example, when you have IPOs and prospectuses, there's a significant amount of historical information that gets released there. But also, like you said, there's also the requirements on companies to disclose inside information, and that's why I suppose that if you have rules on insider trading, that kind of suggests already that you have to be in a semi-strong form of efficient hypothesis.
Yeah.
And then I suppose if you were to have a strong form of the hypothesis, at that point, I suppose it'd be harder to justify imposing insider trading rules. So the two are kind of connected in that sense.
Fantastic. That's the point. The significant difference between semi-strong and strong forms is that whether we do need the law to prohibit insider dealing or not, if inside information can be quickly disseminated or leaked, insiders do not have sufficient incentives to treat or to keep them private, because anyway they can't prevent the inside information from being disseminated anyway. So insider dealing law or the prohibition of insider dealing is meaningless. Ruben, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm just I'm really confused by the strong form, because so essentially what we're then saying is that with the strong form, people trade without knowing what they're trading on, right? People are trading to reflect the market price without any indication of public information about how the true value has been affected. So they're not acting rationally because it's just a herd mentality. What we're saying is, if insiders sell based on private information and then the market reacts so quickly,
the reality is actually that inside information cannot stay private for a relatively long period. So there are some insiders who know the inside information. So when they trade, the information is actually leaked to the market. And the market, let's assume that all investors are so smart and they could probably estimate what the inside information is about, even if it is not formally disclosed. They more or less know what this is about, like the direction, the trend, and does not mean that they are completely ignored. It just means that by observing insiders' transactions, they can also react correctly towards the correct direction.
But that's still speculative. They're still basing their trades on somebody else's trades rather than on information about the value of the company.
In reality, yes, because I think you focus on the reality. In reality, we could see, as we said, people are affected by different factors. They may prefer risks, or they may just follow others. And what we are talking about is in a hypothetical context. Or to make it simpler, you just assume that insiders they can effectively keep the inside information, no matter by exactly telling others or just making some impressions or implications to other investors. So they can effectively keep the inside information, and then others can quickly learn what the inside information is about.
But then it's not inside information anymore.
Then it's not inside information. You are correct. So it can be defined as inside information, but only in a very short period of time. Once a lot of investors, they learn that previously defined inside information, it becomes publicly available. So it can only stay private in a very short period of time. That's why we see it's the most efficient form, it's the strongest efficient form.
But
yeah.
then sorry, I'm holding up the entire class.
What are you all also confused like movements? Come on, let's go on. Yeah.
But then what we're saying is private information doesn't stay private for very long.
Yeah.
But that's still just the same. Then we're not saying that the market reflects private information. We're just saying the market reflects public information, but information becomes public very quickly. So I still don't see how that's any different from the semi-strong form. Just private information becomes public quickly. So it's still not reflecting the non-public information.
I have a question. So for the strong form, is it the information becomes public, or are those people who act on those, private insider information, and then their behaviors become public?
Okay, John.
I think strong form is just, the fact that security prices more accurately reflect everything, and semi-strong form is like the public has more impact on the security prices because they could adjust to everything, like all the disclosures and everything. But strong form like incorporates like private equity and other kinds of.
Let me try to answer all the questions together. The difference between semi-strong form and strong form. Let me try and Lloyd and Benji, please do correct me or just I own. The significant difference is whether the market itself can disseminate the information inside previously defined inside information widely enough just by itself. The strongest form, yes, you don't really need any intervention. It's just the intervention by regulators. The market itself will react very quickly. Inside information will become public very quickly. Whereas in the semi-strong form, the insiders can choose to keep inside information private without disseminating, and then others, there are barriers for others to access inside information. As long as, let's try to make this an extreme case, as long as insiders want to keep them, then those types of information that will stay inside, will stay private, unless they make them publicly available. So in a semi-strong form, perhaps mandatory disclosures requirements still needed. The regulators need to ask companies to disclose material information to the market, otherwise to just stay private. Does this make sense?
I think it makes sense, yeah.
Well, when it comes to the implications for regulators. Okay.
I think the thing that's tough to understand about the efficient capital market hypothesis is that you don't necessarily need to believe any of the three forms are true.
Exactly.
It's just like if, as a regulator, you're looking for a model on which to base your understanding of how capital markets work, any of the three might lead you to different conclusions as to what kind of disclosure requirements you impose on companies. But we may say that none of the three are actually true, or they're all true in specific situations.
I would agree that despite that, I also agree with Louis' comment that a market we observe is quite similar to a semi-strong form, but it does not mean that it's exactly a semi-strong efficient market. In fact, it may exhibit the semi-strong form in perhaps most circumstances, whereas sometimes it's just a weak form or it's just not efficient at all. In other words, we won't see those types of evidence that people do not react, or the market does not react, or they overreact, and so on. Louis, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to mention, which I think this is how I understood the strong form in relation to insider trading, and it made sense to me, was that in the strong form, if you have inside information, you have to trade on it. What you have a really, really strong incentive to, because the company that you're working for, they realize that he could just disclose their inside information and there's nothing we can do to stop him. So they'll pay you less as a director or as an insider. And so consequently, in order to be adequately compensated, you have to disclose your inside information to make money. And so consequently in the whole market in general, all of the insiders have a really, really strong incentive to trade, or in fact you can say they have to trade on that inside information. And so the information gets released to the market really, really quickly, and that's why, because they essentially don't have a choice but to trade on that inside information.
But does that information disseminate to the rest of the market through the process of trading?
Yes.
Or it could just be leaking information as well, right?
Theoretically, I think in theory the idea is that everyone will know that guy's an inside trader and he's the director of that company and he's selling his shares, something's going wrong there. Like they're about to go bust.
Yeah.
And so the whole market reacts to that and it's really, really quick. And so the hypothesis is that if you have to trade and information has to get out, it does the same thing in the semi-strong form as the mandatory disclosures. It's essentially telling the public, this is the information that's going to happen. It's just done in a different way. We don't need the mandatory disclosures.
So in the strong form, the theory is not that the inside information gets leaked through just by leaking it. It gets leaked through trading.
It gets released via trading, and in fact, the insiders have to trade it. And so I think that's the difference between it. To me, that's the main difference between the theories.
Well, sorry.
I just want to say yes, really. Yeah, go on. Ruben.
So if insiders trading the information is what allows the market to adjust to the true market value, then insiders will always necessarily be the first to trade.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
in the strong form, you still need insider trading regulations because insiders will always be the first to trade. Therefore, they will always take advantage of the market being behind them, right?
Yeah, that's the theory is that the point is that you don't need the insider trading. At that point, insider dealing, that's just dealing. Like in the strong market hypothesis, that the information, so like, let's say I own a company, or I'm director of a company, and I know it's about to be bought. In the strong market hypothesis, the fact that I'm selling my shares and I'm the director, the market value drops rather than going up because people realize the director is selling his shares, something's going on there, so no one else will buy those shares. And so the market automatically reflects that information.
Yeah, okay,
And that's, yeah.
I understand. Sorry for taking up so much time.
No worries, and thank you very much, Louis. And I think the significant difference just has an implication whether prohibition of insider dealing is needed. In the strong form, it's just as Louis said, we do not need to step in as as lawmakers. We do not need to step in to prohibit insider dealing because there isn't actually sufficient incentives for insiders like directors to trade on the inside information, which we'll just say very shortly as private. Okay, so Sherry and Don, do you have any other questions regarding this? And I'm afraid if you have questions, come to me and we can discuss later. And I'm afraid we need to move on. So now, as you know, as I just briefly touched on at the beginning, so now if you look at capital markets and you look at what companies really disclose, is a mix of the compliance with mandatory disclosures and voluntary disclosures. So beyond the mandatory requirements, they sometimes provide additional information, and this is particularly important today when it comes to like sustainability-related information, ESG, or traditionally we call corporate social responsibility. So corporate social responsibility, it remains like on a voluntary basis. Companies may provide that types of information. So why do they disclose their how they exercise the corporate social responsibility? Or in addition, sometimes it may not be the required time for the company to disclose financial information, but they may choose to disclose in advance, or they may provide forward-looking estimations about their financial performance. There are different motivations for companies to do so. And as I said that, in reality that it's a mix, and I think in the future you need to rely on both mandatory disclosures and voluntary disclosures. Companies we could assume that they are motivated by their own economic interests. Okay, then let's think about, let's say that one side is in favor of mandatory disclosures on a polarized basis. So one side would argue that all information should be disclosed, should be included in the mandatory disclosure regime. And the other side would say we don't need mandatory disclosures at all. So companies will have strong enough incentives to provide sufficient information voluntarily to the market. So by doing so, we try to comply voluntary disclosures and mandatory disclosures, but it does not. I'm not going to say that we just need mandatory disclosures only, or we do not need mandatory disclosures at all. Okay, so I will give you perhaps 10 minutes to prepare in smaller groups, and then we will debate. And so perhaps this side, mandatory disclosures, this side, voluntary disclosures. Are you happy with so you are in favor of voluntary disclosures, so you can base your discussion purely on efficient capital market hypothesis. This side is mandatory disclosures. Okay, so 10 minutes for group discussions and then debates. So I will then stay back and allow you to debate with each other. Okay, yeah, let's go. All the two boys, Jacob and General, would you like to hear a bit earlier? Let's just discuss together, you guys.
Well, I suppose one of the main reasons for mandatory disclosures is whether, well, you could say we need mandatory disclosures if the companies don't have strong enough incentives to disclose information on their own basis. So what would be what would make the company want to disclose information? I guess that's the first question.
Investors think more news is bad news.
Yeah.
If you don't disclose, they assume it's because it's bad. But I think the problem is more that if we don't regulate, I'm kind of taking mandatory disclosure to also mean that you're regulating the standard of disclosure. And I think that's the bigger issue, is that you need to make sure that disclosures are fair. Because although the market can adjust to non-disclosure in terms of saying, well, it's clearly not in their interest if something's going wrong. If you're not regulated to disclose both sides of the argument, that's when you get serious problems with overpricing or underpricing. I'm in favor of mandatory disclosure.
Sometimes it's like
everyone else is.
people say that
anyone that wants to lower systematic risk, disclosure kind of came back after 2008. A lot of the reforms and stuff like that, a lot of regulators, they came together and they imposed a minimum level of standards that companies should report. Rather than before that, it was there was a lot of obfuscation and no reporting at all with regards to the quality of investments and the actual underlying assets and composition and stuff like that. So that's one aspect of why you would is to lower the overall structure.
I think in the reading I saw a really helpful phrase that is essentially it's like a prisoner's dilemma in the vault. So if you have solely voluntary disclosures, although for all of the companies in the market, it would be beneficial if everyone fully disclosed their information. But the problem is that if only one company in your sector discloses the information, that entire sector may benefit from it. And so actually all the companies have incentive to wait until someone else discloses. And so it becomes like prisoner's dilemma. No one wants to go first, but someone needs to. But once someone goes, it'd be better if everyone went, it'd be beneficial to the whole market. But everyone has an incentive to wait till someone else does it. And so that's why you need to make it mandatory, because now everyone doesn't have a choice, they have to. And then you get the benefits of voluntary disclosures, like you said, for it's better for the company to show investors, well, hey, we're doing more
there are
told
just
we're doing
Yeah.
it beyond mandatory, we're actually showing that, you know,
profits for the
we're trustworthy, we're not gonna lie when, we're not gonna try and hide stuff for you.
They also like
But
disclose like the things.
Everyone still has, everyone's still forced to disclose at some point,
One of
and
the
so
main
avoids that.
regulations in the UK is to disclose prospectus and action report. So it's a lot of
Sorry to interrupt, Louisa, I agree that is not reason that I want to, but it also the public agency, anything that is the public could also know, and everyone can enjoy it.
So it's a lot of information that
It
needs
does
to be
not mean
included. So
that everyone needs
that would be
to
another
pay
negative
for
comment
it.
for
So
disclosure.
there's the cost
You're
of
getting
it
prospectuses
fall
for
onto
like
the
over 100
few
pages
number,
long.
small
And
number
what you have is
of
instead of
players in the market, developers.
all
who are
investors
enjoy
taking
it.
a look at it
In
and
that
making
case,
informed
there is no
decisions,
free
you're just having like a
so
few key
people
players
will decide.
analyzing it,
Well,
and
I'm
then
saying,
the
I'm using the economic
less
concept,
experienced
so
investors
the,
going
that
reliant
means
on
everyone will
that
be
instead.
reluctant to
So I guess
provide
that
that kind of economic good. So that's why we need the government to provide public good. In that way, we would say that
That's
information,
during the
public
reading
information is
assessment,
also
like,
public good, then we
They
need
need
the
it to be the
government
way up
to
to
impose
the
the
value of the
requirements.
information to the cost of it, because to some companies it
Thank
would,
you.
like, if they were forced to disclose this.
Does it talk about the kind of information
Because it's not
pertains
cheap.
to
Because
mandatory
they have to get
disclosure?
it externally.
Does it go into more effect in the reading? I didn't see anything in the reading. I think a guy talked about how mandatory disclosure would
It's not cheap.
increase the
So,
market return for
Yeah.
investments is one of the benefits, but I
yeah,
didn't really
so
agree with that.
it blocks smaller companies from being as competitive and disclosing
There's
everything.
an article by,
It does remove the
by
competitive
Super
advantage.
Official.
If you've got
These guys are kind of the contrarians
all
of
your
commercial
information
law.
out there, it's
Like they
everybody
write a lot of things.
in a
and it's like,
competition
no,
knowing your
the,
weaknesses and knowing your strengths, so your competition knows.
like the general thinking in this area is totally wrong. And so, and then it creates like a counter argument to a lot of what
This
a lot of their articles. And I think that's the kind of thing like in their argument, like, oh no, it happened. Mandatory disclosures are totally wrong.
Is the thing of
then
information overload.
Everyone, I think everyone was kind of like,
inundated with
they're,
lots of
we know that mandatory disclosures are a good thing, we just don't know why.
Analyze the data.
And I think that's
It's
like what
I guess if you
spawned a lot
think
of
like
the,
our reading list, if we had like
anyway.
hundreds and hundreds of books, I don't know about you, but I would read them, and I would just go in blind. Whereas if there's maybe like a couple of good books, I'd probably know a lot about this situation, be able to make an informed decision. So where there's every company saying this is all our information, a huge stack of
I
information,
feel like
no one would really know
someone
what to do.
that's just the big
This is maybe the select few
But then
that
to
would
look
sit through it all, but who's going to
to
do
like
that?
say, oh, you have to disclose all this national information, something that's just like the cost to a company that doesn't operate internationally.
I mean, I'm kind of assuming that we were only talking about listed companies, so that already sets a pretty, that's a pretty sizable company. Before you even get to some of the listers.
But I think as well, that also plays into like the balance we were talking about between mandatory and voluntary. That in certain industries, like even though you're kind of pushed into disclosing like overall, or like the overall important figures that you need in certain industries where like other figures are really, really important. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but in those cases it's better that it's voluntary because if the investors know, well, this figure is really important for this industry, the companies then have an incentive to disclose it because you've already disclosed everything else, like how much money you make. If you're losing money, they're going to sell something wrong. That kind of, at that point, you might as well just make it voluntary, avoid forcing other companies to make these disclosure costs. But this specific industry could volunteer the information anyway, because it's so vital to your business prospects. So I can see, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And all of Apple's competitors are gonna go to Apple's investing in AI.
But then when you look at the limitation of like disclosures, one of the things they talk about is the flooding of information.
So, are you ready for the debate? Or do you need a few more, 3 minutes more, or are you ready, guys? Okay, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. No more, I'm afraid. Just 3 minutes, please. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Your last point was that with mandatory disclosure, there's a flooding of information.
Oh yeah, I think that's the only point that was kind of corroborated by people in finance. They talk about how the more you make people mandatory to disclose it as the more forms that people have to fill out, kind of like a checkbox that you have to they have to go through. rather than that,
understanding was
I think there should be more like quality curation of what needs to be mandatorily disclosed, and it shouldn't be like a set barrier at a time and just keep increasing. It should be like periodic reviews where you really think about what is pertinent to disclose rather than just more paperwork. I mean, it's just added more research costs for investors to kind of like sift out what's needed and what's not to invest in.
So you're saying that should be up to the regulators to
cause
decide?
more problems than there would
No,
be.
it's regulators, but the ways that regulators are looking at it's wrong. Instead of like adding more barriers, they should impose periodic. It should because a lot of things that what they're doing right now is that they set a standard and then they don't look back on it. They don't try to reverse it or try to limit the information that's being output to the market. So.
This is our information.
Well, we've got quite a lot of points here. But in terms of like what should be mandatory, I think it's just a really good point about creating a level playing field and quality.
You want to get
In terms of like listing companies, so exchange having maybe that's a good one, and
some people do, they'll put it out just to say, oh, we've done well,
well,
it
needs some sense.
It's different for a
So I think that's a pretty strong argument, because if you don't have mandatory disclosures, then it might be that you can correct me if I'm wrong. On one you have a massive amount of restrictions,
you get information asymmetry,
and that might be
like when you're buying a car, you're going
going
off the information that the dealer's giving you, and if you have full trust in
Yeah,
it's great, and it's a lemon.
So that's actually quite a big argument. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and also analysts
Well,
need
this
some
would
kind of
probably remove that
information
option,
on which to base
in reality, like I just
their
don't think it would
views,
achieve that.
and mandatory disclosures
It's
to
just not
provide
practical.
the bulk of that
It would,
information, because
In reality,
it's mostly financial.
Sorry guys,
information
I'm
that's
really sorry. There may be a lot of ideas going on, so I may need to stop you guys and let's debate before we take the break. And then, yes, can you please, some of you just turn around. And yes, I'm going to observe. Let's see who can convince who. Okay, so which side would like to start? Start first.
I feel like it makes sense for us to start because we're like proposing for and then we're going against. So I feel like that makes more
Are you
sense.
happy with this?
Yeah.
Okay, so who will you guys? Yeah, please.
I think we talked about a few different things. We tried to round it all up together at the end. But I think the most important thing that we were talking about is that setting a universal standard, a universal level playing field across the market, it promotes efficiency because it means all investors have that same baseline from which to work. But then the thing that potentially works against that is that holding all companies to the same standard, all companies are different, and industry-specific disclosures is something that we shouldn't be looking at mandatorily. So you're probably setting a minimum standard and looking at financial information, but then beyond that, it becomes a little more challenging. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I suppose. Like when, like you said, it's when it's a public good of disclosing information. So, for example, in the whole market, even though it may be when disclosure is only voluntary, all the companies would benefit if all of them had made some kind of disclosure about their information. It would increase efficiency because of the free riding problem. So, for example, if only one company discloses their information and it shows massive profits, big boom, the whole sector would then profit from that one disclosure, because investors would go, oh, well, there's clearly something going on in that sector, we'll invest in all these other companies as well. And so it's kind of like a prisoner's dilemma, that actually everyone has all the companies in the market have an incentive for someone else to go first. And so by introducing mandatory disclosures, it kind of solves that problem in that everyone has to disclose, which increases overall efficiency because there's no sort of waiting for someone else to do it first. But then I think we also agreed that sometimes if you have too much information being disclosed for a specific sector, that it's too much information, it's a flood of information. And that can be a problem. And actually in some sectors, because some sectors are sort of different, even though you may have baseline financial information, other key statistics might not have to be disclosed. And so you can leave that for voluntary disclosure, because and then that avoids also the flood of information problem as well. So again, there needs to be sort of a balance between the two. But I think at the very least you need some, like Ruben said, there needs to be some kind of baseline to avoid that prisoner's dilemma.
And to wrap that up, and
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can we get
one
another
sentence.
slide?
One sentence, is
Okay.
it okay? All right. When you're looking at a market where a significant amount of participants are unsophisticated investors, this is actually quite an important safeguarding measure because it ensures that they have equal access to information on all industries, which stops them from making decisions based purely on marketing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you didn't mean to stop you completely. I mean, perhaps we should allow this side to respond to the first two points. Otherwise, I'm not sure whether they can remember everything, and we can just discuss back and forth. Okay, so let's move on to this side first, and you can also rebut your arguments. First of all, any rebuttals? Well, you've got 3 different points actually.
So the underlying thing that I kind of grasped from all their points was efficiency and that increased efficiency, and I feel like it does quite the opposite, because it just means companies begin to focus on the short term. They begin to think, oh, okay, so I've got this report I've got to put out, I've got to make myself look good. They reduce their innovation, they don't want to invest in things. There's the cost and the burden on companies. Not every company can afford to be audited and be reported to this standard, and so if you look at it from that way, companies then can't afford to do other things. They also don't want to do them because they're going to have to publish them before they want to. And regards to the information overload, it's just like anything. If you gave us a reading list that was 4 pages long, chances are I'm not going to do it because it's too much, and I wouldn't engage with it because I'm overwhelmed and I don't want to do it. And I think investors would find that as well. And in terms of the point of investors aren't sophisticated, they're not like sophisticated, they don't understand, I don't think this information will help them, because 1, they don't understand it, and 2, they'll see things that really aren't that relevant. I don't think companies need to disclose all this information and people become volatile. If you keep telling us all this information, I would think my exam's going to be awful, and I'd start getting volatile and taking risks. And I feel like investors would do the same. If you can see every minute detail of a company, I probably wouldn't want to invest in it, because I'd be able to track everything they're doing, and you become honing in on these tiny little details, and it just overall, it reduces competitiveness, it reduces investors' sort of chances and responsibilities within it, and then just kind of everything. I think it overall does reduce the efficiency of every aspect of the market and companies.
Really, and Martin.
I wanted to add to that, like, as I see it, a mandatory disclosure kind of acts as like a baseline. It acts as a floor that people all like have to start at. But voluntary disclosure acts almost like a ceiling, where a ceiling that companies should reach. And in order to reach that, they voluntarily disclose information which is relevant and important for the company image or the progression of their company. So I think when you look at it that way, it's something for people to reach for, rather than something that they have to do, like something that that everybody has to do. So that distinguishes them from other companies and can promote image and
Brilliant. And rebuttals? Okay, cool. 3 rebuttals. Okay, please. Yeah.
Okay, just on the last point, if you say voluntary disclosure means companies disclose what's relevant, I feel like I would say voluntary disclosure makes companies disclose what's beneficial rather than what's relevant. And I think that's the issue of, if you make it voluntary, they will disclose what will boost their share price, but they will not disclose what harms it. So you get this asymmetry where the good things are being disclosed, the bad things are being buried, and mandatory disclosure kind of creates a better standard and level playing field of good and bad.
Okay, and can we just go to Louis and Alois, and then we move back to Alicia and Michael, perhaps? Yeah, okay, Louis.
I was just thinking about the first point you mentioned then, about the sort of short-term, it creates a short-term perspective. I can definitely see that, but I think it's also important to remember that we're talking about IPOs. They've already so companies that will publicly list have already reached a certain threshold. And IPOs are not the only source of equity financing. So, for example, when we think about, private financing, so where you have an angel investor or something. So for something like a tech company, which is very long-term perspective, at that point, yeah, probably having to do an IPO or some kind of mandatory disclosure constantly, that wouldn't be ideal for them. It would be pointless, and their share prices would fall. But if you have a sufficiently sophisticated investor, which if you're investing in a tech company, you probably would have to be, because it's a riskier investment as well, it protects unsophisticated investors as well. But they'll fulfill that role through those kinds of long-term companies. I can understand what you mean when you say it's an overall trend which might reduce efficiency somewhat, but I think that's outweighed by, like I mentioned before, the prisoner's dilemma problem. And so when you have those long-term companies, there are other sources to get around that and increase efficiency as opposed to voluntary disclosure, which I think has a lot of drawbacks by it. Yeah.
So just that efficiency point, firstly, I don't think we actually talked about it that much between our initial points. Most of it was to do with safety of market participants. What about companies which have listed early without making a profit? For instance, Amazon was listed on Nasdaq for like 12 consecutive years where it made a significant loss. I think in the contemporary financial era we're in, there's a large acceptance of companies which aren't making a profit and are investing heavily in their growth and innovation, which is well established across markets. Not everyone can be audited at this level was a point that you made, and that it's costly, but there's many other ways to raise capital. I would suggest that if you really can't afford to be audited and you can't afford to be paying listing fees, then perhaps you should be looking at crowdfunding or more innovative and modern ways to raise capital, private equity too. Taking risks as a retail investor who doesn't fully understand the information that's provided or TMI, I mean, this is a valid concern, but that's why we have analysts, and analysts do work based on mandatory disclosed financial information, which is also done on a quarterly basis, which means that all information is comparable over time, and all companies have to follow the same regimented framework. And then finally, to respond to the point about the floor versus ceiling arguments of mandatory and voluntary disclosures, it's worth considering the history. Many of these disclosures were brought in following the 1840s when there was a railway mania in London, and that period was famous for prospectuses and information to investors which was completely wrong, and a complete lack of regulation regarding what kind of information was provided to investors, characterized by a group of financial professionals called stock jobbers who would basically flog railway stocks to any retail investors that they could, and it led to significant losses for people at the time. And then mandatory disclosures were brought in. So they're safety nets, and I believe we do need safety nets for that reason.
Fantastic. Okay, so because we don't have enough time, we just give this side to rebut, and probably we can't return to you guys. We will still agree. Okay, Mark and Ishvan, then please do rebut their arguments against their arguments quickly.
Sure. I think the push there is that there needs to be a minimum baseline that needs to exist, but this minimum baseline is likely to organically arise. Because insofar as companies want to gain things like equity, they want to mitigate things like perceived risk because they want investment. So they have the incentive to push forward a baseline of information. But I think companies still disclose harmful information, insofar as companies want to do things like highlight accomplishments, and highlight their career, like their success in their sector. They can't only like push forward accomplishments without arising suspicions. So there's more of an incentive to disclose all forms of information and explain that information, especially if they're not making immediate profit. So there's better information about the industry. There's also reporters in various industries like money, stuff, and economic explain like if you're doing suspicious things or if you're not reporting as frequently. The comparative is that if you don't report yourself, your assumptions about your share is going to be based on more like speculative information. So companies are likely to have like a minimum standard that they have a self-incentive to report. This means that there's less information released by companies, but it's better explained. And insofar as we still have like an organic baseline of companies wanting to share, there's still like a safety net and investor accessibility. So even on our side, disclosure of certain information is going to organically arise. The question is whether the additional information, so the higher floor that would happen via mandatory requirements, would be more detrimental. So insofar as it would dilute the availability of important information and expand the risks of diluting the competitive edge for companies, that additional disclosure requirements would be more detrimental. On our side, there's like an organic baseline that arises, and everything else is in the remit of companies to ensure that they have competitive success.
Okay, brilliant. And Matthew, anything you want to write down?
No, I was just going to briefly add that essentially to what Ruben was saying is that where companies are going to only disclose beneficial information. Beneficial is quite subjective. It's not only about the good things, and even if they only disclose the good things, it will be inevitable that the bad things will show through the performance of the company, which will then look even worse for the company when they're not honest about their decisions or the events that occurred during the time. So the company will need to be able to balance and understand, what information to, provide and how best fit to show the performance of the company, and it will also show the management system of the company and how management goes, and it will reflect the whole image of the company essentially. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And then anything else?
The last thing I probably want to add is regarding like the actual risks of litigation, as it's by bringing in like hard laws where it is if you don't do this then this, you're opening a lot of companies to legal action and what could be for a small mistake or a mistake on your auditor's part, it does. I think the liability expands to both the auditors and the company itself and the directors, and that's putting a lot of people in circumstances that isn't ideal. And then with regard to like the big large companies that are across different countries, if the UK outright said we are forcing you to do this, there's the standardisation challenges. The US might not do it. Companies from the US might pull from the UK because they can't keep up with it, and say if they're operating from their standards, they may not understand ours, and that feeds into your litigation risks, and it makes our country less desirable for investment. And that's the last thing I'd probably add.
Yes, that's the argument against the level playing ground argument. Okay, so yes, thank you very much for your contributions. I think I've learned a lot from you today as well, which I probably will also include into my slides for next year students. So they also benefit from your discussions. Or just we don't have enough time for you guys to further develop your arguments. Let's take a break. We'll have to go through very quickly the civil liability regimes. Okay, let's get back by 25 past 10, that'll be fine. Okay, thank you guys. What I want to highlight here is, does not work. So, we are going to look at the private law protection for investors. So investors can just use the civil law regimes to protect themselves directly. So this is in the private law domain. That it does not mean that the public law does not intervene in misstatements in disclosures, no matter in prospectuses or ongoing disclosures. In week 5, when we talk about market manipulation together, we will look at the criminal offences of misleading statements and misleading impressions. Those two criminal offences will also cover misstatements in this context if they are serious enough. And in addition, when we talk about administrative sections, the FCA's regulation, the FCA can also impose, let's say, sections or fines on companies if they have made misstatements. And of course, when it comes to administrative regulation, usually the requirements evidence are at a relatively low level, whereas when it comes to criminal offences, then the requirements of evidence are relatively high. Then we call them public law enforcements, and today we focus on private law enforcements. So the investors really own civil law regimes. They can bring legal actions directly against companies. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, I'm not really sure, we'll just talk about public law enforcement and private law enforcement. What is the unique role of private law enforcement compared to public law enforcement? As you know, we have got legal intervention in general, at least to deter certain market players from making wrong behaviors. Then what's the unique role of the civil liability regimes? Okay, Ruben.
To protect investors, to kind of, or protect or kind of compensate investors.
So in addition to the deterrent effects, is there anything any function which is unique when it comes to civil law, Luis?
Well, so like the public law elements are essentially to protect the market. So for disclosures, that kind of thing. Well, it's protect investors, but also the market. But I think with private law, especially something like negligence, it's when you look at the private law remedy of damages, which is essentially compensation for losses wrongfully caused.
Fantastic.
It's individual. So if when it comes to the market-based remedies, they're punishment. It's their punishment for not adhering to the requirements that protect the market. But if you're an individual investor, that you won't get compensation from the public law. There's no like public fund you can claim from. But in private law, if you're an individual investor and you were negligently or fraudulently induced to invest in this company, you can get back the damages or the losses that you suffered for being induced.
Really, that's a unique role of civil law regime, because based on the civil law liability regime, then investors individually can claim for compensations for their economic losses, whereas criminal law or administrative regulation, they do not have such a function. So money will go to the public sector. Okay, that's a unique role of the civil law regime. And I'm not quite sure. I think for law students, you are very familiar with liability standards and the material requirements. Lloyd, do you need me to explain them briefly? Different liability standards.
Would be helpful if you can.
Okay. So can I ask someone to explain a law student? Anyone would like to volunteer? Or okay, Louise, please just quickly go through intention records and negligence and so on.
Sure. Well, so there's sort of, I'm more of a negligence guy, so I'll explain it in that way. So in private law, in civil remedies, when you're looking, when someone commits a tort or a civil wrong against you, there are two main kind of remedies that you'll have. So the first one is intentional. So that would be fraud. So in fraud, the intention or the mens rea is it's deliberate or reckless. So deliberate meaning you act with the goal of defrauding someone to take money from them, or reckless meaning that you should have known. It was so obvious that what you were saying was wrong, that you should have known what you were saying was wrong, and the law holds you to that standard anyway. That it's equivalently deliberately wronged someone. And so in civil remedies, that would give you damages, which is like compensation, but you'd also be entitled to salatium, which is like a minor remedy, which gives you essentially like emotional damages or punishment damages for the fact that someone deliberately wronged you. And then in negligence, there is no mens rea requirement in negligence. So in negligence, it's the duty of care concept. So the duty of care is you owe a duty of care to someone that you ought, that was so obviously impacted by your actions that you should have thought of them. And so by doing that, you breach the standard of care. And the standard of care is the amount of care that a reasonable person should have taken to avoid the harm occurring to that person. So if you think in this case something like Dittman against Barrow, where it's investment, it's that if you're an investor and someone negligently gets you to invest, what it means is that they didn't intend to do it, but it was so obvious by their actions that they did. It's like if they didn't check. It's like, oh, I'm not going to look at what I was doing. It's so obvious that if you don't check, that there could be some kind of harm that would occur to the investor. If that harm occurs and you don't take any steps to avoid that harm, which by not checking you breach standard of care, you're then liable. But in negligence, because it's not intentional or reckless, you only get compensation, you don't get solicitation, which is extra.
Let me just briefly use an example to explain the first three standards. Well, just to explain the standards, so I'm going to use the criminal law liability standards. So, for example, let's say murder. If I really want that person to die, so I kill that person. So that means I intended to kill him. So that is intention. So I knew what I was doing, and that was exactly the result I would like to achieve. And that was knowingly or intentionally. And when it comes to recklessness, I hit that person heavily, then he may die, he may survive, I don't know. But I could foresee perhaps he would die, but I don't care about the results. I could foresee, but I just don't care. Let him die anyway. And then when it comes to negligence, as Louise said, it arises from a duty of care. I think a typical example is in a car accident. You should have taken care of another's lives, and then you overlooked the perils. So then we don't really have strict liability in capital markets law. It may arise from, for example, product liability. You do nothing wrong, but you are still liable just because the law makes you liable. So that is the system. Okay, so when it comes to the general tort of deceit, I think in Scots law it's called delict. I think quite similar, I'm not really sure. Okay, so but similar to English tort law anyway. So when it comes to tort of deceit, we apply intention or recklessness. We do not have a negligence standard. We will still use these standards next week and the week after when we look at insider dealing. So that's why I think it's kind of like essential. Okay, here we go. So let's look at the liabilities for misstatements in the prospectuses. And then if Section 90 rules was enacted in 2000, then just 24 years ago. But before that, were there any available civil liabilities? Yes, and they are still available. But because Section 90 is so powerful, then they become useless, de facto useless. So before that, we can have a look. They are in the general tort of deceit, general common law tort of deceit, as well as the Misrepresentation Act. Can I just ask you guys to briefly summarize let's say there are different cases I listed here. In which circumstances these cases will apply? So, for example, Barry, what's this about? So here, it's particularly about prospectuses. It just applies the general tort of deceit to the prospectus, misstatements in the prospectus. But it only applies to what we call fraudulent misstatements because it applies tort of deceit, the common law tort of deceit, which means the two higher standards, which is intention or recklessness. So which means this case, this common law, and there was a statute following this, but anyway, they didn't cover negligent misstatements. A company won't be liable for negligent misstatements in prospectuses. Then common law developed, so we call the Hadley rule. Then companies would still be liable for negligent misstatements in prospectuses. However, then in Caparo, if you had a look at the textbook, these are explained in relatively more details. In Caparo, then the definition of duty of care narrowed in this case. So in Hadley, the duty of care would arise if the party which provided advice or information had a fiduciary duty of trust or confidence. Okay. So, and then if the another party which received the information also relied on that piece of advice or information. However, in Caparo, it narrowed down the definition of duty of care. In particular, I think the most significant impact was then in Caparo, the court confirmed that if we would hold the provider of information liable, then another party, the claimant, should prove that the provider of the information could reasonably know that this particular claimant would rely on the information or the advice he or she provided. And this, I think, effectively makes it very difficult for any claimant to argue that the provider of the information was liable for the negligent misstatement. So basically, for negligent misstatement, case law makes it very difficult for the claimants to prove that they relate on and or the other party could reasonably foresee the reliance. So are we clear about the case law authority? Okay, so Misrepresentation Act, it includes both a fraudulent and negligent misstatements, but what is the limit of Misrepresentation Act? And Michael?
It doesn't cover omissions of statements.
Yeah, it does not cover omission. They usually the tort of deceit, common law tort of deceit, does not cover omissions either, unless in both Misrepresentation Act and the common law, unless because of the omission, the whole set of information received by the investor was effectively different, and then because of the omission, the another types of information received by the investor became untrue. But so that was also difficult for the claimant to prove that omission was so important or so essential. Then any other limits of the Misrepresentation Act? Have you had a look at it? So I'm not going to.
Don't they have to also prove like a contractual relationship or nexus between the party and the person providing it?
Yes, it only governs any misstatements in a contractual relationship, because it means that if someone entered into the contract based on misstatement, it means that if the misstatement was made before the contract was reached, but we would regard that misstatement as part of the contract. But there should be a contractual relationship. When it comes to the prospectus, probably yes, if the investors directly subscribed to the company's offer. Nevertheless, well, later we'll have a look at aftermarket investors. If investors, even if they looked at the prospectus, but they purchased the shares from on the secondary market from other investors, then there isn't any contractual relationship. The Misrepresentation Act does not apply. Am I making any sense? Okay, so Ruben.
One very brief question: is that not also the case for negligence? That the way the three-step test of the proximity of the relationship, the way that's been interpreted under Caparo, is also that the negligent misstatements can also only be used by initial subscribers. Or have I got that wrong?
Probably yes. If we look at the de facto results, probably yes. When it comes to,
I just wanted to add that one of the tests is proximity of relationship. So you're going to have to establish that there's a close relationship. So if it was a person investing from the secondary market, it'd probably be hard to argue that there's a proximity of relationship.
Yeah,
but then if it's an initial subscriber or shareholders,
arguing that probably that test is going to be satisfied on that court.
Yeah, I think that actually the result outcomes are the same identical because if we look at the interpretation of the proximity, it only means direct legal relationship because it excludes indirect legal relationship. And of course, misrepresentation there should be a contract. Okay, so this is the general law, Misrepresentation Act, this is the general law. Then we're going to talk about Section 90 is the special law. So, yeah. And here we'll talk about the relatively limited scope of application of the common law and misrepresentation. And the most significant difference is that whether a proof of reliance is needed. So this makes a huge difference to investors' requirements. All of those, yes, the investor, the client needs to prove that he or she relied on the misstatement, and it should not be a kind of like a individualized reliance. It should be a reasonable reliance. Or does this mean anyone can interpret it? It just means that I can't see that in this particular case, I'm the particular investor, then myself just relied on the information. I should also prove that for that piece of information which is misleading, any reasonable investor would really like that. So there is a higher requirement. It's the objective test, not just the subjective test. It's not about what I think in particular. It's about how any reasonable investor would think about whether the misstatement would be material or not. Okay, so yeah, so that is the general picture. And then hot box. So we know that in Section 90 does not require investors to prove reasonable reliance, so we could call it a presumption of reliance. Okay, what is the rationale for presumption of reliance? Is it reasonable to presume that all the investors they relate on misstatements? Okay, yes, Ruben,
You get it.
and Luis, yeah, you speak one by one.
The way I understood it is kind of I think the on the market theory is the important part, that it says, well, market price necessarily depends on information. Therefore, if there is misstatements, then that will affect the market price. Therefore, anybody who buys the shares at that market price has that reliance is there.
Yeah. Yes, that's brilliant. And Luis, do you want to add anything on?
Well, I think the only thing I might add is that I think the rationale for it is protection of individual investors. So if you're an investor and you don't have compensation for misstatements made to you or when you buy a share and it turns out it's based on the price is based on a statement, it would make you less. It increases the amount of risk for every single investment, and so for overall market efficiency, increasing access to the market, it's actually better that you presume the reliance because it increases the number of people who are willing to invest.
Fantastic. And I'm going to summarize later. Mark, do you want to add anything on? Okay, thank you guys. Yes. So, fraud on the market theory. This theory actually is based on, is summarized by the U.S. courts. Actually, it's a theory in law actually. And what does this mean? Now, first of all, it provided a theoretical rationale for the presumption of reliance as Ruben cited. So, if we assume that all information, no matter correct or incorrect, the information is factored into the share price. If the share price is inaccurate, then we would say that the inaccurate price has fooled the market as a whole. Anyone in the market, so any investor, any investor has been fooled, and they would assume that they relate on. Instead of saying they individually relate on the misstatement, the particular misstatement, we would assume that they just relate on the integrity of the market price. That's the theoretical rationale, but I would like to say that the U.S. courts aimed to make it more pragmatic for investors to use the civil liability regime to protect themselves. Otherwise, as we can imagine, it's really difficult. In some cases, perhaps it's possible, but in many other cases, it's not that easy for investors to prove that they just relate particularly on this piece of misinformation. Okay, so there are two reasons. Of course, there are theoretical rationale. On the other hand, the U.S. court considered the feasibility of the claim. Okay, and it had a profound influence on securities law in the U.S. And of course, there has been a transplant. They also affected the capital markets law in the UK after 2000. I just want to highlight here, in the US, the fraud on the market theory applies to disclosures in both prospectuses as well as ongoing disclosures. The difference is that in the UK, we only apply fraud on the market theory to disclosures in the prospectuses, but not misstatements in ongoing disclosures. When it comes to the fraud on the market theory, it means the presumption of reliance. This is the most significant implication of the theory. So, the presumption of reliance only applies to misstatements in prospectuses, not ongoing disclosures in the UK. In the US, it applies in both situations. Here is the difference. And so let's have a look at Section 90. I would like to ask you to briefly to combine Section 90. We will talk about the presumption of reliance. And in addition to the presumption of reliance, what are the other benefits provided by Section 90 to investors? Or what other factors make Section 90 more widely applicable compared to topic deceit and misrepresentation? Okay, Marco?
I think there's a big thing is that there's no need to demonstrate this proximity of relationship. So
that's the aftermarket investors, right?
Yeah. So it's a big contrast to negligence. So there's no need to assert that the person who's made the misstatement has like a responsibility for that person, and also it includes a wide range of people as well. It includes the person who's made it, the person who's allowed it to go through, or the person who's even like just checking or reading it and things like that as well. It can range from a lot of people.
Right. So first of all, so any other comments anyone would like to add on? Sorry, Alicia.
Oh yeah, this is somewhat of an expansion of what Marco said, because I completely agree with Marco, but it means that you can have more liability, you can hold more actors liable if you purchase from the secondary market. So it's by bridging or removing that proximity requirement, you're able to hold the company more liable because a lot of purchasers are on the secondary market.
Brilliant. It overcomes the barrier created by parallel, by the proximity, or the requirement for the underlying contractual relationship based on the underlying contractual relationship by misrepresentation. So here we go. So even investors purchase the shares from the secondary market, as long as they purchased it before the misstatement was credited, then they should be compensated as well. They should be able to claim, because we would consider that they also relate on the prospectus to make investments. And also in terms of who should be made liable, this applies to a wide range of actors, including directors, of course, including the company and directors, and anyone who may be responsible for the misstatement, including sponsors or those gatekeepers we mentioned last week, as long as they were particularly responsible for that piece of information. And then also I want to highlight is about the liability standard. So it's a negligence standard or above. So it's relatively lower. It's negligence or reckless or intention. And also the investors do not need to prove that the person breached the duty of care if the person acts with negligence or recklessly. This burden of proof shifts to, but it's not strict liability, shifts to companies or directors. They have to prove that they truly believe that the information was true, despite that the fact of the information was misleading. Of course, then there's no any burden of proof falling onto the investors. And omissions, this is also important. So that means if a piece of information should be disclosed, it is mandatory, a mandatory disclosure, then it was omitted. No matter if it makes the whole picture different or not, and then anyway, as long as it was omitted, then Section 90 will apply. Alright, so this is for disclosures in prospectuses. We've got Section 90A. This came into force in 2006. And the difference is that we didn't have any common law ground or any statutory liabilities for misstatements in ongoing disclosures. And the rationale was the traditional one. The disclosures were just for shareholders to exercise their ownership rights to vote. And then we just leave it with company law, not capital markets law. But then later, when we talk about the investor protection function of ongoing disclosures, yes, we need to allow them to claim compensations for any misstatements, for economic loss caused by misstatements. But the difference is that let's now compare Section 90A with Section 90. They are actually very different. What are the differences between the two? Like the burden of proof, Ruben.
It's, you don't have that same almost strict liability. It's on the, not the defender, it's on the claimant to prove
reliance.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, no, I've got myself confused, yeah. It's on the claimant to prove reliance on the information rather than it doesn't have that universal, it's factored into the share price, fraudulent on the market theory.
Exactly. So first of all, I would like to say, there wasn't any common law background, and even if you look at the cases mentioned earlier, like Caparo and Hatley or misrepresentation, you would find, we have no time to go into the details, you would find that even if the court of a particular case was willing to apply those cases, they will end up with nothing, because though they would have to encounter the barriers in those in the common law of tort of deceit, as well as misrepresentation. But when it comes to Section 90A again, the big difference is that the claimant investor should need to prove the reliance. The presumption of reliance does not apply here. This is one significant difference. Another one is the liability standard is recklessness or above, no negligence standard, which means so there are negligent misstatements made in ongoing disclosures and reports. Companies are not liable at all, and then only companies will be liable under Section 90A, not their directors, not their auditors. But the difference is that how to read the company's mind. So we would just consider whether we call a person discharging managerial responsibilities. If a person discharging managerial responsibilities in the company knew or was reckless about the wrongfulness of the misstatement, then the mental status of this person comes towards the mental element of the company. So as we can see, fraud on the market theory does not apply here. I would like to say, I didn't see any academics talking about this. It's my own understanding. It's a compromise to the traditional UK position. It's just a trade-off between the modern US law position and the traditional UK law position. It's just a balance. Section 90A was already a very radical reform compared to the previous UK law position. So I guess that lawmakers could not make just U-turn shift just completely towards the US position. Okay, so I just want to briefly share with you, because usually we know that no matter Section 90 or Section 90A, they are not widely applied, but things are changing, especially as you can see, these cases were just in the past 2 years. They are applications of Section 90A, and we can't go into the details, especially the another two we just learned about the two cases in 2023 yesterday. So both the cases, this is uploaded to the folder of week 3. You may have a look at the judgments of the High Court, and they have some explanations about which persons should be defined as the persons discharging managerial responsibilities. This is one of the issues explained by the High Court. And in particular, these two cases, they interpret reliance. This is also important. They limit the reliance to direct reliance, which means the reliance on a particular misstatement. If the investor relies on market price, this is indirect reliance. So this is excluded, and we can see a very clear position of the High Court that fraud on the market theory does not apply to Section 98 here. Okay, so yes, and that is this is about Section 98 and the civil law liabilities. Any questions so far? Okay, so are we clear? Right. Okay, so thank you very much, guys. And we're going to look at inside the deal. I would like to suggest you have a look at the cases, the FCA cases, and there is a ECJ case as well. So I got the hyperlinks for the cases. Have a look at the cases. We will discuss the details here. Okay.
I just don't like this one.
So the way that the practice